I was just helping my friend's mom with a small task. Then she leaned over and whispered, "This stays between us." And just like that, nothing would ever feel the same. The day started like any other, the kind of ordinary afternoon where nothing remarkable is supposed to happen. I was at my friend's house, just passing the time while he was distracted by some homework or a phone call. The house was quiet, filled only with the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant ticking of a clock. I wandered into the kitchen, running my fingers along the worn edge of the counter, letting my eyes drift around the room. That's when I noticed her. She was moving through the kitchen with a calm, unhurried grace, the kind that made you feel immediately at ease without even realizing it. Her hair caught the light in subtle shades of chestnut and gold, and there was a faint, warm scent, floral, soft, comforting, that lingered in the air as she worked. She wasn't just busy. She was intentional with her movements, the way she folded a towel or set a cup down with care. It was mesmerizing in a quiet, almost hypnotic way. When she looked up and caught my gaze, I felt a strange flutter in my chest, one part recognition, one part curiosity. She smiled, just a brief, knowing curve of her lips, enough to make the air feel heavier between us. Her eyes, calm and steady, seemed to notice more than I wanted them to. I turned back to the counter, trying to focus on some meaningless task, but I could feel her presence like a gentle pressure at my shoulder. I offered a small, casual smile, hoping it seemed natural, but I noticed her fingers brushing against mine as she handed me a dish towel. Just for a second, just the briefest contact, and I felt a warmth spread from my hand up my arm. Nothing overt, nothing intentional, yet entirely electric. My mind told me it was nothing. My chest said otherwise. She bent slightly to reach for something on the lower shelf, and in that moment, her shoulder brushed mine again. The movement was subtle, almost accidental, but the effect was undeniable. It was a small, fleeting closeness, a brush of warmth that made the air between us seem charged with possibility. I caught a glimpse of the way she moved, the gentle poise in her posture, and I realized she had a quiet confidence that didn't demand attention. It simply invited it. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, I felt seen. Not just as a kid or a guest in her house, but in a way that made me aware of myself, my nervous energy, my quiet thoughts, the little habits I never noticed in myself. And yet, there was something unspoken in her glance, something that felt like an invitation to lean in, to pay closer attention, to notice the moments that usually slipped by unnoticed. And just like that, the ordinary afternoon shifted. A simple encounter in the kitchen, a few seconds of shared space and accidental touch, and the world felt a little smaller, a little warmer. Something unspoken had begun, quiet, subtle, and entirely magnetic. I didn't know what it meant yet. I didn't even know if it meant anything at all. But I knew one thing. Nothing in that kitchen that day would ever feel ordinary again. It started with a simple task, something mundane, almost forgettable. I was helping her sort through a stack of old letters and bills, the kind of chore no one ever really enjoys, but she had a quiet patience about her that made the task feel lighter. The afternoon sunlight filtered through the kitchen window, casting a warm golden glow over the room, and everything felt hushed, like the world had paused just for us. She leaned over to pick up a particular envelope, her fingers brushing mine as our hands met on the worn counter. The contact was brief, almost accidental, yet it sent a jolt straight through me. Her perfume, soft and familiar now, wrapped around me like a memory I didn't realize I had been missing. And then she spoke, quietly, almost conspiratorially. "This stays between us." Her words lingered in the air, soft but heavy, as if they carried a weight far beyond the envelope in her hand. I froze, caught between curiosity and hesitation. It wasn't a flirtation, not really. It was intimacy of a different kind. Trust. A small, private connection that no one else could touch. My chest tightened in a strange combination of guilt and anticipation, and I realized, for the first time, how profoundly aware I was of her presence. She straightened, her hair falling over her shoulder in a soft cascade, and I noticed how the afternoon light caught the subtle gold in it. Her eyes met mine, steady and warm, and for a moment, the world outside the kitchen seemed to fade. Everything felt slowed down, stretched, suspended, the way the seconds feel when something important is about to happen. We continued working on the task, but now every movement felt charged with quiet energy. When she reached over to hand me another envelope, our fingers brushed again. Slight, fleeting, accidental, yet I felt it, every heartbeat tracing the line of that tiny contact. My mind kept telling me to ignore it, to treat it like nothing, but my body didn't agree. There was an unspoken tension that neither of us named, and that made every small interaction feel infinitely significant. Her voice broke the silence again, softer this time, almost reflective. Some things are just meant to be kept. She wasn't looking at me directly now, but I could feel her awareness, like a gentle weight pressing close, not physically, but emotionally. And I realized, with a mix of awe and apprehension, that I was starting to understand her in ways I shouldn't yet, ways I wasn't supposed to. There was a brief pause, a quiet moment where we both lingered near the counter, our hands separated but our energy intertwined. I noticed the subtle warmth radiating from her, the slight tilt of her head as she studied the papers, the quiet steadiness in her movements. And I understood, without needing her to say it, that this small, shared secret, a casual envelope, a whispered phrase, had opened a door between us. By the time the task was done, the sunlight had shifted, shadows stretching across the floor. I left the kitchen with a strange lightness in my chest, but also an ache I couldn't quite name. That whisper, "This stays between us," had stayed with me, echoing in every step I took. And I knew, even then, that nothing about our relationship would ever be quite the same again. After that day in the kitchen, I started noticing her everywhere, not in a literal sense, but in the way her presence lingered in my thoughts, in the memory of small gestures and fleeting touches. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, like the echo of sunlight on a wall long after the sun had moved. Every time I visited, even casually, it felt as though the world slowed down around us, giving space for moments that weren't ordinary at all. It began with small errands, helping her carry groceries in from the car, sorting laundry, or folding dishes. These were tasks I would have normally treated as routine, mundane even. But with her, every movement seemed charged with a quiet intimacy. The brush of her hand against mine as she passed me a towel, the brief touch on my elbow to guide me through a narrow doorway, the subtle warmth of her shoulder as we leaned close to reach for the same item. Each contact was fleeting but electric. Her laughter became a language I couldn't stop noticing. It was soft, understated, yet it carried a warmth that made me want to linger just a moment longer. I caught myself memorizing the way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she smiled, how her fingers would unconsciously trace the rim of a cup when she was thinking. I began to realize that it wasn't just physical proximity that drew me in. It was the way she made ordinary moments feel like quiet confessions, like we were sharing something that belonged to no one else. There were times when our proximity became almost unbearable, though still completely innocent. Sitting side by side on the porch while she sipped her tea, I would feel the faint warmth of her arm against mine. She would glance at me, ever so briefly, as if testing the boundary of our connection. I could feel her pulse in the subtle press of her wrist when our hands brushed, and it was enough to make my chest tighten with anticipation. We said nothing about it. The unspoken tension existed in the pauses, the quiet glances, the gentle sway of conversation flowing naturally around us. Even casual touches began to carry meaning. A hand guiding my elbow as we maneuvered around a narrow space. A gentle nudge to get my attention, her hair falling in front of her face and me instinctively tucking it behind her ear. These became small, private rituals. Each one lingered in memory, like faint footprints on my skin and in my mind. It was impossible to ignore, though neither of us ever acknowledged it directly. And yet, there was a shared restraint, a mutual understanding that what we were building, whatever it was, needed time, needed patience. The tension existed, quiet and simmering, but it was framed in respect and warmth. By the time I left each day, I carried her presence with me, the echo of lingering moments, the memory of touches that weren't fleeting simply because they were brief. They stayed. They mattered. For the first time, I began to understand how slow burn attraction worked, how intimacy could grow not through grand gestures, but through small, deliberate moments that left the heart racing and the mind yearning for more. And I knew, even without saying a word, that something significant was quietly unfolding between us. It was in the quiet moments, when nothing was happening but everything felt charged, that I began to realize the depth of my feelings. The previous weeks had been filled with lingering touches, subtle glances, and shared silences that seemed to stretch time. But now, for the first time, I became painfully aware that this connection wasn't just comfort or curiosity. It was something more complicated, something I wasn't supposed to feel. One evening, I found myself sitting on the porch with her after a long day. The sun had dipped low, leaving the sky brushed with streaks of gold and rose. She sat beside me, a cup of tea warming her hands, her shoulder occasionally brushing mine as we shifted slightly to catch the fading light. The proximity that had once felt innocuous now felt heavy with meaning. I was acutely aware of every subtle movement, the way her fingers wrapped around the cup, the tilt of her head when she listened, the gentle cadence of her voice. "I sometimes wonder if people notice things they shouldn't," she said softly, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Her words weren't directed at me, yet they landed squarely on my conscience. I felt a pang of recognition, the ache of a forbidden curiosity that had been growing quietly inside me. We spoke casually, about ordinary things, books, music, life's little frustrations, but there was an undercurrent I couldn't ignore. Every laugh, every pause, every accidental touch carried an unspoken weight. When our hands brushed as we both reached for a stray napkin, I felt a spark of heat spread across my skin. My mind raced with questions I wasn't ready to ask, and yet I didn't want to break the spell of the moment. I tried to rationalize my feelings. She was older, wiser, someone I should admire from a distance. The thought of crossing boundaries filled me with guilt, yet the pull toward her was undeniable. I noticed how effortlessly she seemed to navigate the space between us, close enough to create tension, far enough to keep propriety intact. It was intoxicating and terrifying all at once. Her gaze lingered on me briefly, just long enough to make my chest tighten, before she looked away. The subtle way she measured her words, the quiet restraint in her body language, made me aware of my own hesitation. I wanted to lean in, to feel the warmth of her presence more fully, but I held back, aware that every action carried meaning, that every glance was loaded with implications. By the end of the evening, as I stood to leave, the world outside the porch seemed sharper, more real, and yet I couldn't shake the sense that something profound had passed between us, unspoken, undeniable. I walked away with a mixture of longing and guilt, knowing that what we shared in those quiet, suspended moments was growing into something I could no longer dismiss. For the first time, I understood the fragility of desire intertwined with respect. There was an undeniable attraction simmering beneath the surface, yet it existed in tandem with restraint and awareness. And that tension, the tightrope of longing and propriety, made every encounter with her feel alive, charged, and unforgettable. The next shift in our connection came unexpectedly, in a moment that demanded honesty rather than casual conversation. It was late afternoon, the golden light spilling through the windows in soft, slanting rays. We were in the living room, sitting side by side on the couch after I'd helped her bring in a box of old photographs from the attic. The air was warm and quiet, filled only with the faint sound of distant traffic outside and the occasional creak of the wooden floor beneath our feet. She turned to me with a look I hadn't seen before, softer, quieter, yet threaded with a vulnerability that made my chest tighten. "I don't usually show this side to anyone," she murmured, tracing her finger along the edge of a photograph. "But sometimes, life just overwhelms you." Her voice was steady but carried a fragile undertone, as though she were balancing the weight of her own admission carefully. I didn't speak at first, unsure of what to say. I simply reached out, my hand hovering near hers, wanting to offer some comfort without overstepping the invisible boundary. She noticed, and for a brief moment, our hands touched. Her skin was warm and reassuring, her fingers resting lightly on mine, and it felt as though the weight of the room, of the day, and of every unspoken word had settled there between us. I found myself opening up as well, sharing fragments of my own insecurities, the ones I usually kept buried. Talking to her felt different from talking to anyone else. Her attention was undivided, her presence steady, as if she were holding space for the raw edges of my emotions. I realized, in that moment, how much I trusted her, how much her calm and confident energy made it easier to reveal parts of myself I normally shielded. There was a pause, pregnant and heavy, as we lingered in that closeness. I felt her shoulder brush against mine, subtle but deliberate, a grounding contact that made my heart beat faster without a single word spoken. Our eyes met briefly, and in that look was an acknowledgement of something unspoken, a tension between the desire to step closer and the understanding of the boundaries we maintained. She exhaled softly, a small, almost imperceptible sigh, and the weight in her chest seemed to ease. "Thank you," she whispered. "It helps to feel understood." I nodded, my own heart echoing the same sentiment. It wasn't about romance, not in a conventional sense. It was about connection, about intimacy that went beyond words or gestures, about feeling truly seen by another person. When I finally stood to leave, the moment hung between us, delicate and charged. Her hand brushed mine one last time as I passed, a touch that was fleeting but left a trail of warmth lingering on my skin. Walking out the door, I carried more than the memory of that afternoon. I carried the quiet intensity of trust, vulnerability, and a connection that was slowly, inevitably deepening. It was a turning point. For the first time, I understood that our relationship had shifted, not through grand declarations, but through small, meaningful acts of closeness and shared vulnerability. And I knew, in the deepest part of me, that this was only the beginning of something profound. The evening air was cool, carrying the faint scent of jasmine from the garden outside, as I lingered at the doorway after dinner. We had spent the last few hours preparing a simple meal together, our conversation flowing easily, punctuated by laughter and the quiet rhythm of routine tasks. But now, as the kitchen settled into soft shadows, there was a weight in the silence, a shared understanding that neither of us needed to voice. She moved closer to clear the counter, and our hands brushed as she passed me a plate. The contact was fleeting, yet it left a warmth that lingered in my palm and traveled slowly up my arm. I felt my chest tighten, a quiet awareness of how profoundly these small touches had begun to affect me. She caught my glance, and for a moment, her eyes softened in a way that seemed to acknowledge the tension we had been nurturing together. "I enjoy these evenings," she said, almost casually, though her voice carried a subtle tremor. There was no urgency, no demand, only a quiet honesty that made my pulse quicken. I nodded, struggling to keep my own voice steady, aware that every word, every glance, carried weight beyond the surface of the conversation. We stood side by side for a moment, washing the last of the dishes. Her shoulder brushed mine repeatedly, a gentle reminder of the closeness we shared. I noticed the faint warmth radiating from her, the soft scent of her perfume lingering like a memory in the air. It was intoxicating, not in a physical sense, but in the way it made me acutely aware of her presence, of the unspoken connection threading through each subtle gesture. When it came time to part for the evening, we both lingered, hesitant to break the delicate bubble that had formed around us. She stepped closer, her hand brushing mine lightly as if by accident, but I could feel the intention behind it. Our eyes met, lingering longer than necessary, and I felt an unspoken acknowledgement of everything we had been feeling, the quiet tension that had been simmering beneath the surface for weeks. Her smile was soft, almost shy, yet it carried warmth and reassurance. "Take care," she whispered, her voice steady but gentle, as though speaking the words aloud would make them real. I nodded, my own lips curving into a small smile, and for a heartbeat, time seemed to pause. The air between us was charged, not with urgency, but with quiet understanding, a mutual acknowledgement that we had crossed an invisible threshold without breaking the boundaries that kept our connection safe. As I walked out the door, I felt the echo of her presence lingering in the room, the warmth of her hand, the soft tilt of her head, the subtle pull of her gaze. I knew that neither of us would speak of this evening explicitly, yet it would linger in our memories, a quiet testament to the bond we had nurtured. The attraction, the closeness, the unspoken desire, all were present, but tempered by respect and patience. It was a moment of acknowledgement, a gentle recognition that our connection had deepened into something meaningful, something quietly romantic yet entirely safe. And as I stepped into the cool night, I carried with me a sense of warmth and anticipation, knowing that this slow-burn journey was far from over, yet profoundly fulfilling in its present simplicity. The days that followed were quieter, yet somehow richer. Each visit, each casual interaction carried the echo of what had passed between us, a shared understanding, a silent acknowledgement of the bond that had grown, subtle yet unshakable. I found myself noticing her in small, intimate ways. The way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the soft rise and fall of her chest as she laughed quietly, the way her eyes seemed to linger for a heartbeat longer than necessary. One afternoon, I returned to help with some errands, carrying a stack of groceries up the narrow staircase. She met me at the door, her warm smile immediately softening the tension I hadn't realized I'd carried. For a moment, we simply stood there, her hand brushing mine as she took a bag from me. The touch was fleeting, accidental, yet it lingered in my mind long after it ended. I realized I had grown accustomed to the quiet rhythm of her presence, the subtle magnetism of her attention, and the safety it offered even as it stirred something deeper inside me. We moved through the day with the same gentle intimacy that had defined our past weeks, folding laundry, sharing a quiet cup of tea on the porch, exchanging stories about trivial things and significant memories alike. Each gesture, each fleeting touch, carried weight without ever becoming explicit. The warmth of her hand on my shoulder as she guided me to avoid a spill, the light brush of her fingers when she handed me a napkin, the steady, understanding gaze that met mine when words fell short. These were the threads weaving our slow-burn connection into something enduring. By evening, as the golden light faded into soft twilight, we found ourselves in the living room once again. She leaned slightly toward me, her cheek brushing the back of my hand as she laughed at something I had said. It was a touch so gentle, so unassuming, yet it left my chest tight with the quiet intensity of all the unspoken moments we had shared. I felt a deep, almost overwhelming sense of gratitude for her trust, for her presence, for the subtle yet profound connection that had grown between us. As I prepared to leave, she walked me to the door, lingering just long enough that our hands brushed again. "See you soon," she said softly, her voice carrying a warmth that made the world outside feel colder in contrast. I nodded, my heart full, understanding that what we shared didn't need to be spoken aloud to be meaningful. It was enough that it existed, quietly, respectfully, and profoundly. Walking down the steps, I glanced back and caught her gaze one last time. In that look, there was affection, acknowledgement, and a hint of desire tempered by understanding. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't overt, but it was enough to know that this connection, however unconventional, was genuine, rare, and beautiful. And as I stepped into the night, I carried with me the quiet warmth of our shared moments, the weightless magic of subtle touches, and the knowledge that sometimes the most powerful relationships are the ones that grow slowly, quietly, and fully in the space between words and gestures. In that slow-burn connection, we had found something rare, a bond that respected boundaries, nurtured intimacy, and left a lasting impression on the heart.